kind of struggling to logically reconcile. It's been bothering me a bit. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind playing kind of devil's advocate for me for a minute on the topic of predeterminism, predestination.
Okay.
So the argument from the Calvinist perspective is God is omniscient and omnipotent. So since he is omniscient and omnipotent, he must have all knowledge and know all things. So if he did create you, then this means that he knew everything that you were ever going to do. So how do you logically reconcile? So what I'm looking for is a way that I can kind of condense this into an argument that people can understand. It makes sense in my head when it's not true, but it's difficult to relay verbally.
Right. So knowing all things, it doesn't follow from that I am the direct cause of every event. So it's true that God knows all things and all things that exist were created by God. But one thing that sets us off against Islam and against Calvinism is the idea that God has created a world where there's not just one cause or one direct cause or what's called occasionalism. There's also secondary causes. And so it doesn't follow from the fact that you know everything to being the direct cause of everything. And we think that God can be the direct cause of some things. So for example, when the incarnation occurs, that's a direct causal action of God. When the second person of the Godhead is acting within time and space and history, those are direct actions of God. First cause, right? But there's also other beings that have natures that allow them to act and also be causal agents in the world. And because God is sovereign, because God has omnipotence, he can create a world where secondary causes are possible without it detracting from his honor and his glory. So the whole of the Calvinist position, just like the Islamic position of occasionalism and direct causality and causation by God alone, it's all premised partly on divine simplicity, but also on this idea that somehow, for whatever reason, it detracts from God's honor if he allows creatures to be secondary causes. But if you look at the totality of Christology and our anthropology of human nature and human persons, we're causal agents. We do have the ability to act and to cause things in the world. Christology is hinging upon there being two wills, two natures, and the human nature also having its proper will and energy. So even though the Logos is a divine person, he possesses a fully human nature. And the actions of that fully human nature are truly and correctly human causal actions because he's fully human. So in the same way, I can truly act in the world to be a causal agent. So if I knock over, so that Roman Catholic dude shows up, he weasels up next to me and I thump him over and he falls over, I really am the causal agent doing that. And even though God knew it, it doesn't make him the direct causal agent in that action.
Right. So I understand the distinction between the two, but so a question was posed to me recently that I had to think about, and so I was going to kind of pose it to you and see what you thought about it, which was the idea that if there is prophecy, and there is, and it is going to be fulfilled, and we know it will be, then that means that there must be a set of predetermined actions that will fulfill that prophecy, right?
Well, they're predetermined in the sense that from the vantage point of the divine decree, God knows what's going to happen. But that doesn't entail the fact that he's the direct cause of those actions.
So I've been reading, some of our, kind of church history and what different church fathers have said on this. And it seems like it's a question that even they kind of struggle with a little bit, depending on what you're reading and who you're reading.
What every position will struggle with is the reconciliation. I mean, it's just called compatibilism. I mean, I think in the Orthodox view, what we do is we find this question ultimately resolved in Christology. So, for example, Christ is a divine person, and so it's the second person of Godhead actually acting in time and space and history. So we wouldn't want to say that all of his actions are predetermined, because that would mean that God is predetermined. There's nothing that can predetermine God, right? So that's why Calvinism has tended to shift over towards Arianism, especially on the person of Christ. And you can find this all the way back in St. Augustine, who makes the mistake of calling Jesus a predestined man. Well, Jesus isn't a predestined man. He's the second person of the Godhead actually working and acting in time and space. So you can't say he's a predestined man. Do you see why?
Yeah, I do. I find the what you call compatibility, or compatibility between the two. The best way that I heard it described to me was actually from Father Deacon Ananias, who said, "Look, it's both and."
Sure.
It's a.
I mean, it's the same in Christology, right?
That's the best way to reconcile the two. Do you also kind of agree with that?
Absolutely, of course. I mean, that was the point of the Christology analogy, is that for us, rather than like speculating about, well, what's God's decree in relationship to the created order, all of this begins for us from the vantage point of Christology. So even the doctrine of predestination for the Orthodox is going to flow out of understanding and having a correct doctrine of Christology first, because even what we know about the Trinity comes to us through the person of Christ. So we have to start with Christology. And Christology is a reflection of Trinitarian theology. So I'm not inverting those. I know that in the history of the church, you get Trinitarian theology first, and then from that flows Christology. But the revelation of God comes to us through the person of Christ primarily. And so we're going to find the reconciliation between the sovereignty and action of God and the will of man and his freedom in the person of Christ, who is fully 100% God and 100% man. So you're going to find that synergy there. And that's the reconciliation also of the doctrine of predestination, sovereignty, and free will. So there's an interplay between the two that is compatible.
Gotcha. I understand that too. But from my perspective, I think you can probably see, if you're talking to somebody who hasn't really sat down and thought these issues out, the predeterminism argument is a hell of a gotcha, and it seems to draw a lot of people into it.
Yeah, I mean, I was a Calvinist for a long time, but what got me out of that was Christology, because I realized that my Calvinist anthropology and Christology would necessarily be Nestorian.
Gotcha. Do you think that there's a way that you could make a very condensed, easy argument to kind of the layman that would maybe turn them away from that direction?
Well, again, if we understand what it means to say that Christ is not two persons, but rather a single divine person, I highly recommend the book St. Cyril of Alexandria and the Christological Controversy. I'm not advocating everything that author advocates for, but it's a good work of scholarship on Cyril's Christology and really understanding how Cyril's Christology isn't just important for Ephesus, it's also reaffirmed at the Fifth Ecumenical Council, and it undergirds Maximus's argumentation at the Sixth Council. So if you want to bypass that book, because it's pretty hefty, it's pretty long, there's a really good book called Disputations with Pyrrhus, where St. Maximus is actually interacting with what you could say is a monergist type of position. So what it comes down to is not the relationship of the world to God's decree, but in what way does God act, and in what way does our will synergize with, or is it determined by or supplanted by the divine will and energy? And that's why Christology, when it hammers out the doctrine of two wills and two energies because of two natures, that's where we get that synthesis that also explains how we work within the divine economia in terms of providence. So is providence God decreeing everything that I do, or is it me working in a synergistic way with the divine decree? It's both.
Right. It's both and. Got it.
And we say that not because of we say that because of the totality of revelation, and in other words, what Scripture and tradition about divine sovereignty, divine providence, foreknowledge, omniscience, and the human will, not by speculating about the human will, but understand, as St. John of Damascus argues, the anthropology that we have as Orthodox is divinely revealed. We only get the anthropology that we have through the Christological councils, because they tell us and define what human nature is in the person of Christ, and thus how he's consubstantial with us. So the solution to the free will grace dialectic of Calvinism is found in the synergy in Orthodox Christology.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense. And thanks so much for your time tonight, Jay. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andrew. I hope that's helpful. I would say, again, Disputations with Pyrrhus is really helpful for that. and St. Cyril of Alexandria and the Christological controversy, which resituates the predestination free will question in terms of Christology. And for me, that was just kind of the final solution for me. That really solved the issues. Because I understand. I mean, I had a lot of those same questions and issues coming out of Calvinism as well.
Oh, hey, mate. Yeah, just following up from the guy before a bit. I'm having trouble letting go of my Calvinist influence about the absolute sovereignty of God. So perhaps I can pose these following questions. Starting off with the resurrection of Lazarus. Was that monergistic or synergistic?
Well, the fact that the bodily resurrection occurs by the direct power of Christ as a natural miracle or a miracle in the realm of nature, it does not follow from that there's no such thing as the human will or energy in the process of conversion.
Okay. Now, with Pharaoh, did God harden Pharaoh's heart, or did Pharaoh harden his own heart?
The text in Exodus say both, and so we see that as a version of synergy again.
Okay. With in a previous talk, you were bagging chaos theory because of the possibility of flux and all that, and it's self-refuting because if there's flux, nothing makes sense. So with the electrochemical reactions that occur in our brains and result in our thoughts, who controls them? Can they be random and chance?
Well, I wouldn't equate the mind or the soul to the brain. So the fact that we have electrical firings in our brain, it doesn't follow from that reductionism is the case.
Because I mean, with the occasionalist argument, how the brain and how they come together, because
well,
how do you?
But I'm not we're not occasionalists, so I mean, so what do you mean? So I mean, are you an occasionalist?
Because well, I found that argument persuasive because if the electrochemical reactions in our brains that result in our thoughts, I'm assuming they come from our brains, if they're chance and random, then our thoughts would be unintelligible. So that's a self-refuting argument. So that's an argument in favor for occasionally for God's absolute sovereignty. Otherwise, our thoughts could not be intelligible.
I don't see how the argument that, are you saying that our thoughts are determined by chemical reactions in the brain and God is the direct cause of that? Is that what you're arguing?
Yeah, it's God has to be absolutely sovereign. There can't be.
Okay,
any,
well, you're using the phrase that, hold on, you're using the phrase God has to be absolutely sovereign. I don't know what you mean by those words, because it sounds to me like that's just code for your philosophical presuppositions about what God is and how he has constructed the world. So, I mean, let's rephrase it this way. Is it possible that God can create a world where there's secondary agents?
All right. There's a follow-up question that kind of answers that, if I can ask.
Okay.
Can God's decretive will be frustrated?
Well, I don't have the view that God is the direct cause of every event, so I don't understand decretive will in the same way as you.
I guess can God's as in, can things not go as planned because of these secondary causes not acting according to how God wills them to ultimately?
Again, you're just rephrasing your position in a different way. So let's rephrase. Let's hold on. Let's rephrase, because your whole argument here is based on dialectics. So let's rephrase this. Do you believe in the Trinity?
Yes.
Okay. So do you think that Trinitarian theology can be done apart from the Trinitarian theology that comes out of the ecumenical councils?
No, I guess not.
Okay. So if that's the case, then you can't hold to your position, because your position is based on another type of Trinitarian theology than what comes out of the ecumenical councils. Because what you're talking about is like a Platonic determinism. Okay, that's not what the Cappadocians teach. and that's who formulated the church's Trinitarian teachings.
Okay. What about scripture, Romans 8:28?
So again, before we go to scripture, what I want to know is, where are you getting your doctrine of the Trinity from? Because that's where we're going to get our doctrine of person and nature and will and energy. And if you don't have a doctrine of person, nature, will, and energy, there's no way to have a doctrine of the Trinity. So where are you getting your Trinitarian doctrine from?
From God's revelation in scripture.
Okay. But who determined the canon of scripture?
God through his absolute sovereignty.
No. So again, you think the direct cause of God is what determined the canon. Historically, who determined the canon of scripture?
Well, the church.
Okay, what church? What church?
Will.
What church?
What do you mean?
The church. What church? Who makes up that church you're talking about?
The church, I guess, the Orthodox Church. I'm not.
Oh, okay. Well, so wait a minute. So if it's the Orthodox Church, then it's not the Calvinist Church. So they probably don't have the right Trinity, right? Because we don't have the view of the Trinity the Calvinists do. So your presuppositions are all wrong, is my point.
But with the presuppositional argument, it reduces it's I guess there's a reductio ad absurdum here. The argument is true by virtue of the possibility of the contrary. It's impossible.
Yeah, but it doesn't work in a Calvinist view. Yeah, but as a Calvinist, you can't use that argument.
No. As a someone moving towards orthodoxy, but still having trouble reconciling this question of.
Okay, so the question that we're asking, as I said to Andrew, is resolved in the doctrine of Christology. So if you look at the way that your doctrine of divine decree and sovereignty would condition and destroy Christology, that's the lens, the window, the doorway out of this dilemma. Because Christology is impossible in your view of God.